I stood outside my own son's mansion on the evening of my grandson's 8th birthday. The winter was brutally unforgiving this year. The freezing wind cut across my wrinkled face like a serrated knife, biting through my worn-out wool coat. But the freezing temperature outside was nothing compared to the ice in Desmond's words. My only son, the child I had sacrificed my entire life, my career, and my retirement to raise and protect. He stood there, casually leaning against the heavy, expensive oak front door. A crystal glass of expensive red wine rested comfortably in his manicured hand. He looked down at me with unfamiliar, entirely hollow eyes. The tailored suit he wore was elegant. I instantly recognized the solid gold cufflinks gleaming on his wrists. They were the graduation gift I had purchased for him when he finished his master's degree. Now that exact same arm was physically pushing me away from the threshold. "Dad, wait outside in your car," Desmond said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "This party is for family only. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a hot drink, get comfortable, and remember this absolute truth. The people in these stories had every single opportunity to do the right thing. They simply chose not to, blinded by greed and arrogance. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue this story together, and hit subscribe. You're going to deeply enjoy this one. My name is Arthur. To my son and his wealthy, elite social circle, I am nothing more than a retired, impoverished high school math teacher. A relic of the past who barely scrapes by on a meager state pension, living in a cramped, drafty rental apartment on the wrong side of the city. I play the part of the harmless, forgetful old man perfectly. But what Desmond never knew, what I kept entirely hidden from him to protect him from the ugly side of the world, is that before I chose the quiet life of a high school teacher, I was a senior forensic accountant for the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division. For 20 years, I specialized in dismantling corporate fraud, tracking hidden offshore assets, and tearing apart the financial empires of arrogant white-collar criminals. I don't just see numbers on a page, I see the absolute undeniable truth hiding behind them. Mathematics is the only language in the universe that cannot be manipulated by a silver tongue. The story truly begins inside that sprawling multi-million-dollar mansion. Soft, elegant jazz music filled the warm, fragrant air. Wealthy, influential guests laughed loudly, clinking crystal champagne flutes. I could hear the rapid, joyful footsteps of Lachlan, my 8-year-old grandson, running excitedly through the grand hallways. I could smell the rich aroma of the double chocolate strawberry cake I was holding. It was the exact cake I had stood in the freezing rain to buy since 5 o'clock that morning at his favorite downtown bakery. The thick cardboard box felt heavy in my freezing hands. The bright red ribbon wrapping it had begun to soak through with the freezing rain. Desmond briefly glanced at the cake box. Not a single flicker of emotion or gratitude crossed his face. He spoke quietly, his tone hushed just enough so the wealthy guests inside wouldn't hear his embarrassment. "Your presence embarrasses me in front of Simone's family, Dad," he whispered sharply. Simone was his beautiful, sophisticated wife. Her father, Wallace Ashford, was a ruthless venture capitalist and a recognized multimillionaire in the tech industry. In Desmond's eyes, I was just a walking liability, a poor old man wearing a frayed coat that smelled of mothballs and cheap laundry detergent. He had forgotten where the luxurious executive leather chair he sat in every day had actually come from. He had entirely forgotten exactly who had paid for the brutal scars of his past financial mistakes. People often choose to conveniently forget a constant in their life once they discover a shiny new variable with a much greater perceived value. To my son, I was a constant that simply no longer served any profitable purpose. I did not argue, I did not raise my voice or create a scene. That is not how a forensic accountant operates. I simply looked directly into his cold, calculating eyes. His pure arrogance was highly important data. I mentally recorded that data, categorizing it alongside his recent behavioral changes. Then, without saying another word, I turned on my heel and walked away. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, decisive, cruel, and final. The heavy metallic sound of the deadbolt locking echoed sharply through the quiet, snowy night. I walked slowly down the granite front steps, my bad knee aching with every single movement. The snow began falling significantly harder, coating the wealthy neighborhood in a blanket of pristine white. I did not throw away the strawberry cake. I carefully carried it all the way back to my dark, empty rental apartment. Desmond's cruel calculation probably looked entirely perfect to him on paper. He had successfully removed the embarrassing variable from his elite social equation. But he had forgotten one fundamental law of mathematics and life. Every single balanced equation demands a heavy price when one side is deeply wounded. I sat down at my small, scarred kitchen table and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was blank, no new notifications, no apologies. I smiled, a cold, hard expression that hadn't crossed my face in over a decade. My complete silence has always been the initial starting point of a highly appropriate, precise punishment. Desmond foolishly thought he had won when he locked that door. He had no idea that with his own two hands, he had just triggered an unstoppable chain of financial and legal consequences that could never, ever be reversed. That night I sat down at my sturdy wooden desk in the corner of my living room. At exactly 11:47 p.m., my phone began exploding with incoming calls, 98 missed calls. My phone screen kept flashing in the dark room, casting a faint rhythmic blue glow across the peeling wallpaper. Desmond was panicking, I knew that very well, but I did not swipe the screen to answer. I calmly set the phone back down on the desk, face down. Silence is a devastating language that weighs 1,000 pounds, especially when the person on the other end of the line suddenly realizes they have made a catastrophic mistake that cannot be undone. I reached out and clicked on my old yellow-tinted brass desk lamp. The small room filled with a still, quiet, focused light. In front of me lay a thick, blue leather-bound notebook. Its spine had worn thin with time and frequent use. This was not some emotional, tear-stained diary filled with personal feelings of betrayal. To me, it was a meticulous data archive. Documentation is not revenge. It is the undeniable, objective evidence of a destructive pattern. In mathematics, an event that happens once may simply be random. Twice may be highly unusual. But when an event repeats for the 14th consecutive time, it becomes a systematic, fundamental error. It becomes a predictable pattern of betrayal. I slowly turned the crisp pages one by one. The soft rustle of the paper echoed loudly through the silent apartment. Each page marked a specific verified point in time. Each point in time was a devastating financial and emotional indictment against my own flesh and blood. I reread the precise lines written in my own neat handwriting. The initial pain of a broken father was entirely gone. All that remained was the absolute, cold objectivity of a forensic auditor grading a complex problem that had been intentionally manipulated from the very beginning. November 14, 2022. Desmond hosted a lavish housewarming party for his first multi-million-dollar mansion. I took 2 buses across town to bring him a traditional Chinese evergreen plant and wished him peace and immense prosperity. He coldly told me to leave the cheap plant hidden in a dark corner of the backyard because he was deeply afraid it would ruin the expensive feng shui design of his modern living room. March 12, 2024, his extravagant 5-year wedding anniversary celebration at a 5-star downtown hotel. My name was intentionally left off the guest list. Desmond texted me 10 minutes before it started and claimed the party was strictly for corporate business partners. September 20, 2025. I was unexpectedly hospitalized with severe acute chest pain. The attending doctor needed an immediate family member to sign the emergency surgical consent forms. I called Desmond 3 separate times from my hospital bed. He did not answer. The very next day, he sent a short, emotionally vacant text message. He said he was busy finalizing a $2 million contract. He coldly told me I could take care of myself because I still had my state health insurance. 14 times, 14 precise coordinates plotted on a graph, clearly displaying the rapid, terrifying decline of his morality. Desmond thought his continuous lies were clever. He thought I was just a senile, forgetful old math teacher who could easily be fooled by basic excuses about being busy with corporate life. But he forgot who he was dealing with. I do not look at words. I look at the frequency, the variance, and the raw nature of the data. My son's terrifying coldness did not happen randomly in a single day. It was an exponential function, directly tied to the rapid growth of the wealth sitting in his offshore bank accounts. As his income increased, the perceived value of his father in his eyes decreased in direct inverse proportion. The phone vibrated against the wood again, the 99th time. Desmond was trying to reconnect a broken equation that had already fallen apart. He was finally beginning to realize that one side of the problem was rapidly changing. The crisp white envelope I had calmly handed to his private security guard before walking away from the mansion was not a desperate, pleading letter from a rejected father. Inside that envelope was a single piece of encrypted information capable of entirely overturning the luxurious, upper-class life he was trying to secure. He wanted to know what I was holding. He wanted to know exactly why a retired old school teacher could make his millionaire father-in-law turn deathly pale at the mere mention of a specific tax code. I looked at the blue notebook. I looked at the phone, still vibrating across the polished wood of the desk. Desmond still foolishly believed this was nothing more than an old man's temporary emotional outburst. He did not yet understand that when an auditor has officially closed the ledger, every single subsequent explanation becomes entirely meaningless. I stood up slowly, my joints popping, and walked to the old, heavy iron safe hidden in the dark corner of my bedroom closet. I spun the combination lock with practiced ease. There were no stacks of gold or silver inside, only a thick sealed legal file dating back exactly to the year 2020. The exact year Desmond had fallen to his knees before me, sobbing and begging for a financial lifeline. The heavy file rested neatly in my calloused hands. The edges of the legal papers had faded to a pale aged yellow over the years. I carefully flipped through the original receipt copies, the wire transfer logs, and the cashier's checks, all officially stamped and verified by the federal bank. The vivid memories of that chaotic year came rushing back immediately. It had been a terrifying year of global upheaval. It was the precise moment when the financial equation of Desmond's life had nearly collapsed entirely to absolute zero. That year, Desmond threw himself blindly into the volatile business world like a moth rushing toward an open flame. He pulled together every cent of his savings and started a technology hardware distribution company. But the market suddenly froze. Global supply chains broke down. His major business partners cowardly walked away, leaving him holding the bag. He quickly found himself standing directly on the terrifying edge of complete bankruptcy and legal liability. One night, in the middle of a violent, torrential rainstorm, Desmond came running frantically to my house. He no longer carried the disgusting arrogance he wore today, with a glass of expensive wine in his hand. He dropped to his knees on my cheap living room floor. His knees pressed deeply into the old, worn carpet. He cried, tears streaming down his face. He confessed that he had illegally leveraged corporate funds, and that if he could not come up with exactly $370 within 48 hours, he would face immediate federal prison time because of debt and deliberate insolvency. He would lose everything, $370. For an old retired public school math teacher, it was an astronomical, life-altering amount of money. It was every single dollar I had received from selling the beloved ancestral home left to me in the suburbs. It was my entire hard-earned retirement savings, accumulated over 35 long years of teaching high school algebra. Desmond looked up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. He swore on his life to repay every single cent. He passionately promised to take care of me when I grew old and weak, to ensure I would never have to worry about a thing. I did not hesitate for a second. I did not create a complex risk assessment balance sheet to determine whether I would profit or lose on the investment. That is exactly what devoted fathers do. We do not stop to ask whether the market price is fair. We only ask whether the emotional equation works to save our children. My calculation at the time was simple. On one side stood my entire life's financial security. On the other stood my only son's future, his freedom and his honor. I unhesitatingly chose the second side. I signed the heavy paperwork to withdraw my state retirement funds in a lump sum, taking a huge tax penalty. I sold the precious piece of family land filled with decades of beautiful memories. I wired the entire $370 directly into Desmond's failing corporate account. I willingly moved myself into this cramped, freezing rental apartment. Desmond took that infusion of cash and soared. He successfully saved his dying company. He met Wallace Ashford at a high-end networking event. He married the beautiful Simone. He confidently stepped into the ruthless world of high society. He began buying mansions and constantly trading up to newer luxury cars. But as his net worth increased, he began quietly performing a very different, highly corrupted calculation on his past. He searched for psychological ways to reduce the true value of the debt he owed me. He started publicly treating that $370,000 as an obvious, expected obligation that any decent father should have naturally fulfilled without question. He forgot that the money had not magically fallen from the sky. It was literal sweat, it was sacrifice. It was an entire lifetime spent standing exhaustingly at a chalky classroom board, grading endless exams late into the night. I ran my hand slowly across the rough texture of the old legal file. Numbers do not lie. Desmond foolishly believed he had repaid his debt with a few inexpensive, thoughtless holiday gifts and occasional phone calls. He genuinely thought a father's ultimate sacrifice could be assigned a minimal cash value and then permanently erased from the corporate ledger. But he was dead wrong. The true nature of a financial debt never truly disappears. It only changes its structure from one legal form into another. Desmond forgot an extremely important, critical detail from that rainy night in 2020. When he finally received the money, he was in far too much of a desperate hurry. He blindly signed a stack of complex legal documents that my best friend and I had meticulously prepared. He never bothered to carefully read the attached terms and conditions. He had no idea that quietly hiding behind those $370, a devastating legal trap had already been fully activated. That inescapable trap was called Clause 14. I set down the old file from 2020 on my desk. Then I pulled out a heavy document bearing an official, raised red seal across its pages. It was the formal commercial loan agreement. It had been carefully drafted by attorney Thaddeus. Thaddeus had been my university classmate and one of the most brilliant legal minds I knew. He was a highly feared specialist in corporate financial law. That rainy night, Desmond signed this document without the slightest hesitation. He was entirely overwhelmed with blind relief at having secured the money that would save him from federal prison. He flipped rapidly through the dense legal pages in mere seconds. He signed his name on every blank line blindly. He ignored the hidden mathematical variable buried deep on page 11. That specific variable was Clause 14. In the aggressive world of high-stakes financial attorneys, provisions exactly like this are commonly known as hidden nuclear weapons. Thaddeus had accurately foreseen Desmond's potential ingratitude. He deeply understood the predictable psychology of people who become wealthy too quickly. When greedy people reach the absolute top, they often want to erase the traces of those who lifted them out of the mud. We needed a foolproof insurance equation. Clause 14 was and legally clear. The $370 was not a non-refundable gift. It was a strict convertible corporate loan carrying a compounding penalty interest rate if repayment was overdue by more than 5 years. The strict contract deadline was October 31, 2025. Today was already well into 2026. Desmond was significantly more than 6 months past due. What was the exact consequence of that default? Desmond had no idea. He foolishly believed that at worst, I would eventually demand the return of the $370, Fonzo zero plus a little standard bank interest. But high-level forensic mathematics does not work that simply. Clause 14 clearly stated that if the borrower violated the repayment deadline, the entire principal balance and the compounding penalty interest would automatically be converted into direct, voting ownership shares of Desmond's company. And not at its currently inflated market value, but strictly at the original book valuation from 2020. That meant I was not demanding my money back. I was demanding ownership. According to Thaddeus's precise calculations, the original $370,000 from 2020, combined with the accumulating penalty interest over the past 6 months, was now legally equivalent to exactly 49% of the controlling voting shares in Desmond's entire company. I was about to instantly become the largest single shareholder. I carefully folded the contract. I placed it gently inside my old leather briefcase. Tomorrow morning, Thaddeus would formally send an official legal notice directly to Desmond's office. But I knew Desmond was not alone in this high-stakes game. Standing quietly behind his immense arrogance was the dark shadow of Wallace Ashford, his millionaire father-in-law. Wallace had taught Desmond how to casually dismiss and look down on this poor old father. But Wallace did not know that he had accidentally pushed his own son-in-law into an uncontrollable exponential function of complete destruction. Wallace Ashford was a true apex predator in the corporate business world. When Desmond first married Simone, Wallace looked at me with open, undeniable disdain. He coldly told Desmond that coming from a poor family of public educators was a weakness. He taught my son to weaponize shame. Desmond learned quickly. He began intentionally dodging his debt. He started blindly following his new father-in-law's advice, channeling all available corporate cash flow into a highly risky $1 million merger deal. This specific deal was supposed to take his company public. Wallace explicitly promised to invest his own capital, if Desmond could demonstrate the cold decisiveness of a true corporate executive. Desmond firmly believed he was entirely controlling the game, but he forgot that I was a senior forensic investigator. I ruthlessly look at exactly how those numbers were obtained. Last week, through several former IRS colleagues, I successfully obtained an encrypted set of internal documents. Desmond was actively deceiving federal investors to qualify for Wallace's tutor's $1 million deal. He had intentionally falsified his quarterly financial statements. He had artificially inflated the previous quarter's software revenue to exactly 3 times its actual amount. This was federal securities fraud, a highly serious criminal offense. I sat alone in the dark room, turning page after page of the illegally falsified corporate documents signed boldly by my own son. Deep disappointment rose inside me. I had never taught him how to illegally manipulate the final answers. Desmond was currently standing at the very top of a highly unstable house of cards. Wallace Ashford foolishly believed he was the apex predator. But neither of them knew one critical piece of information. The contract containing Clause 14, that I currently held, carried significantly greater legal authority. My 49% ownership stake granted me absolute complete veto power over this $1 million transaction. Tomorrow morning, Desmond will proudly submit his initial listing application. But he has no idea that an entirely unpredictable witness has just entered the equation. A very young witness capable of detonating the entire media bomb. My grandson, Lachlan. That freezing afternoon, while I stood outside the heavy door in the snow and rain, the young boy was sitting quietly in the living room. He was holding an expensive iPad. He was happily recording a video of the storm. The expensive oak front door could not block the highly sensitive microphone. The entire heartbreaking conversation between Desmond and me was perfectly recorded. Desmond's cold voice, the freezing wind whistling, his cruel rejection of his elderly father, the heavy cake box soaked by the freezing rain. Every single heartbreaking sound was flawlessly captured in the child's accidental recording. Lachlan pressed the save button. After that, the video was automatically backed up to the family's shared iCloud account. At exactly 11 that night, Simone opened her laptop computer in her bedroom. Instead of cheerful photographs, the screen unexpectedly displayed Lachlan's clear 30-second video. Simone sat frozen at her vanity table. She was a deeply devoted mother. The naked, undeniable truth beautifully revealed in the clip sent a chill straight through her. She immediately began questioning everything. She questioned the true origin of the $370,000 that had miraculously saved the company. The objective data had been exposed. At the exact same time, I also received a secure copy on my phone. I calmly knew that what was meant to come would finally come. I turned off the phone. I meticulously placed the contract containing Clause 14 into a pristine white envelope. I sent it by an exclusive overnight courier directly to Desmond's corporate office that very night. Late at night, the bright fluorescent lights were still blazing in Desmond's office. Tomorrow was the big day, at exactly 11. The crisp white envelope I had sent was sitting silently on his desk. Desmond stared intensely at the envelope. He used a silver letter opener to slice it open quickly. Inside was a devastating financial autopsy. It was a dense 20-page document. The very first page was a clear summary of the loan from 2020. Desmond frantically turned to the next page. The color began draining from his face. The numbers seemed to dance before his eyes, rapidly accumulating penalty interest. And finally, Clause 14 quoted in absolute full, with his own bold signature sitting directly beneath it. Desmond frantically flipped to the very last page. There he found the devastating share conversion calculation prepared by Thaddeus. 49% ownership of the company, complete undeniable control over the current board structure, now resting entirely in my hands. The $1 million deal with Wallace Ashford instantly became worthless paper. The illegally falsified financial report he was actively preparing to submit to the stock exchange had also been attached by Thaddeus, along with a highly stern legal warning regarding federal securities fraud. Cold sweat began rolling rapidly down Desmond's forehead. He frantically dialed my number. The first call echoed through my empty apartment. I did not answer. The 10th, the 50th, then 98 missed calls. He knew I was deliberately remaining entirely silent. The heavy silence of an auditor, while an arrogant criminal finally realizes that he solved the test incorrectly from the very first step. Desmond grabbed his coat and rushed out of the office. He needed to find Wallace Ashford. He arrogantly believed Wallace's immense power and money could crush a retired old man. 4:00 in the afternoon, the aggressive snowstorm outside had stopped. There was a soft knock at my heavy door. I slowly opened it. Desmond stood there broken. He had not come with Wallace. Wallace had abandoned him the very moment he realized the deal had turned into a financial black hole. Desmond stepped slowly inside. Then he dropped to his knees once again, exactly just like that rainy night in 2020. He cried hysterically. He begged me to sign the waiver agreement. He said that if I did not miraculously save him, he would lose everything. Simone was filing for immediate divorce. He would go to federal prison for years. I walked slowly into the small kitchen. I calmly placed a small pot of water directly on the burner. Then I slowly took out 2 cheap packages of instant noodles. The exact same meal we had eaten throughout the difficult years when he was a struggling college student. Desmond watched me cook in silence. I calmly placed 2 steaming bowls of noodles directly on the table. I slowly pushed one directly toward him. I told him that an entirely empty mind cannot properly solve highly difficult problems. I looked deeply at my guilty son. My face remained exactly as calm as a senior accountant standing before an audit. Severe punishment does not genuinely change people. True understanding entirely does. I slowly pushed the thick share conversion documents directly toward Desmond. I firmly told him I would legally sign an order freezing the entire 49% ownership stake. I would officially save him from federal prison, but on one strict condition: he had to personally submit his formal resignation as chief executive officer. He had to strictly relearn how to be an honest human being before ever learning how to be a millionaire again. Desmond looked directly at me in absolute shock. I was not taking away his money. I was taking away the arrogance that had blinded him for so many years. He slowly picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he proudly signed the resignation agreement. Desmond slowly left my home. His firm steps were significantly steadier than before. But exactly just as I was about to close the heavy door, my phone unexpectedly received a new message directly from Thaddeus. Simone had made an extreme, beautiful decision. She used her entire share of the liquid assets from the complex divorce settlement to repay the original $370. Zero debt directly to me. Simone's beautiful action officially reduced the debt side of the complex equation to absolute zero. 6 months later, this year's brutally freezing winter was finally coming to an beautiful end. Today was a beautiful Sunday. I stood comfortably by the window, looking peacefully down at the walkway. The path had been perfectly cleared of ice. That was exactly something Desmond had quietly been doing entirely by himself for the past cold 3 months. He no longer drove luxury cars. The toxic arrogance he once carried had disappeared. A soft knock suddenly sounded brightly at the door. I slowly opened it. Desmond stood there happily with Simone and my beautiful grandson Lachlan. They happily carried a basket of fresh fruit. Desmond looked directly at me. The incredible sincerity he had brutally lost 10 long years ago had finally returned brightly to his warm eyes. He slowly lowered his head respectfully. He called me Dad with genuine respect. Our very first Sunday dinner was filled with a warm and peaceful atmosphere. At long last, the equation of our difficult lives had finally found a beautifully balanced solution. Desmond had eagerly accepted a fresh start at a small technology company. I peacefully watched my incredible son slowly correct the mistakes in his life one by one. For a devoted father, that was the greatest reward possible. Thank you much for joining Dad's Real-Life Revenge. Please do not ever forget to share your own story directly in the comments and click like and subscribe. I want to happily leave you with one final thought. In difficult life, money and status are only temporary mathematical variables. Only true family bonds remain the true constants. Every single moral error naturally carries a cost, and every single absolute error in personal character will eventually be balanced by a harsh, unforgiving equation of absolute cause and consequence.